There's my baby.
I'm Dana Denha.
And I am Melissa Bondi, and this is Adventures in Parenthood, where we take a ride on the roller coaster that we call parenting.
The realities of life can be terrifying, especially when it involves your children. When they're suffering, your stress and worry reaches all-time highs. You know, I think we've all experienced some different, at obviously varying levels. I mean, everything's not as big as everything else, you know, but have you dealt with any sort of medical emergency or something that just really scared you since you've become a mother?
Yeah, the medical emergency that comes to mind, aside from, the high fevers, which are still concerning, most definitely, was when we had an issue at age, I think it was 4. It was a UTI gone wrong, a UTI we didn't know she had, because 3 and 4-year-olds don't tell us, Mom, I got some urinary pain, and we didn't take the signs that we should have. And she ended up going into the emergency room late one night, of course, from uncontrolled vomiting from the UTI that started to affect other organs, her stomach and whatnot. And that was the outcome, was having to go to the emergency for that. And that's specifically comes to mind when, panic mom mode, and you're into, oh my gosh, and what's wrong with my child, and end up in the ER. But specifically, yeah, that was one of the situations we had to deal with firsthand, unfortunately. But it was a good outcome. Really, everything was okay. Yeah, it was okay.
It's still scary. I mean, it makes you think like, oh my God, what is going on? I don't want anything. This is the most important person in my life. They're more important than your husband.
Right. Right. They're right. The precedence there is right. They're a young child. They can't tell you what's wrong. So that's the worst part, is when they're so young like that. What about you, Dana?
When Keaton was about 2.5 years old, she just couldn't walk anymore. She stopped walking. And it was terrifying. We took her to the ER too. We were there all night long. They took x-rays. Nothing's wrong with her. Nothing's wrong with her is what they said. They kept telling us that nothing's wrong with her. And we bring her home. She's not walking. She's still not walking. And you're like, oh my God, is there something like seriously wrong with her? Like, what is happening? And medical professionals at this point are not giving us any answers in any way. And then we take her to, a specialist where they give her x-rays and stuff. And they say they don't see anything at all, but they're like, you know what, we'll put a boot on her. The boot was not successful. So anyways, yeah. So we end up going back. She gets a cast and she does start walking with this cast on. And so it makes you think like, okay, maybe there is something really wrong. But at this point, they're still saying that there's nothing wrong with her. Do you know what I mean? So then about a week into the cast, we get a call from the x-ray technician, and they're like, we re-looked at her x-rays and we did find a tiny fracture, which was the biggest relief in the entire world, because you're like, why is my 2.5-year-old that's been walking for, over a year now, can't walk anymore? You start thinking like the worst things go into your mind when you don't have a proper diagnosis.
Right. And and that's who we look to, right? We want answers as parents. We need the answers. And yeah, I know that when you don't, it's so traumatic and frustrating, and the burden, right? And weighing on your shoulders as a parent.
Well, our next guest knows a lot about, how stressful being a parent with medical conditions can be. Joining us is Rick Lofgren, President and CEO of the Children's Organ Transplant Association, or COTA. Rick, why don't you tell us what COTA is and, sort of how you got involved with it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having us today. The Children's Organ Transplant Association, or COTA, was founded in 1986. So last year we celebrated our 35th anniversary. And our organization was founded when we had a little boy here in Bloomington, Indiana, who needed a life-saving liver transplant. He had a diagnosis of biliary atresia, which is where his liver was blocked, and a liver transplant was the only way to save his life. So his family went to a university hospital and found out that liver transplants were not covered by their insurance company. And so they came back home thinking that they would not have any opportunity to save their son's life. And the community here in Bloomington put their arms around that family and raised over $100,000 that not only got him listed for his transplant, but also helped mom and dad take care of a lot of other bills that they had. And then fast forward 35 years later, we've helped nearly 4,000 patients just like that first child across the country. We do a lot of work there at Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, and we work in all 50 states and help kids to make sure that their transplant is taken care of and they have an opportunity to have a long and healthy life.
Do you find a lot of people have insurances that don't like cover these sort of transplants where they do need financial assistance? Because you're talking about when you look at the Coda website, it's large amounts of money that people don't typically have laying around the house.
Yeah, one of the difficulties that we've found, Dana, is that a lot of our parents do have health insurance, whether it's private insurance, Medicare or Medicaid. Sometimes they have a combination of two or even all three of those. And usually the problem is not that they don't have insurance coverage, it's they have high deductible plans. So for instance, every year they have to come up with $3,000 to $5,000. And for transplant, that's not a one-time thing, that's an every year thing. In many of our families, that happens in the first couple of months or maybe even the first month of every plan year. So it becomes incredibly expensive. And most families aren't going from like Chelsea to Ann Arbor for the transplant. They're going from somewhere in the UP to Ann Arbor. And the transplant is not only those medical bills, but it's transportation, it's lodging, it's clinic visits that will go on for the rest of that child's life. But one of the largest expenses our families face are medications. And if you think about your copayment for your medications might be $15 or $20 a pop, that doesn't sound too bad until you realize that transplant patients oftentimes have 10 or 12 medications every single day that they have to take, and sometimes multiple doses of that medication every day. So it becomes a multiple $400, $500, $600 expense, and that is for the patient's lifetime. So it becomes very expensive. And it's not so much an insurance issue, it's just more of what are those associated costs that go to keeping that organ alive and keeping that child doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
So Rick, in regard to the children, what are the age ranges that you see and that the families bring?
Well, most of our kids, Melissa, are between newborn and 21. And our youngest patient was transplanted at less than a week old, a young man that had a heart transplant at Dallas Children's Hospital. We do have a carve out for patients that have what's called a single gene disease. And the most common one your viewers will recognize are cystic fibrosis or polycystic kidney disease or sickle cell. So there are no age restrictions. So our oldest patient was actually 64 when he received his transplant. But the vast majority of our patients are teenage and younger. And a lot of those families, both mom and dad work. When you have your expenses increase dramatically with the cost of transplant, all the while your income goes down because all those clinic visits, all the follow-up care, most of our parents aren't able to maintain a full-time job. So when your expenses go up and your income goes down, that's just a bad situation for all of our families.
Gosh.
Are there certain criteria, like how do people become like COTA members, where they can get on that list to get funds raised for them?
Yes, and we work with patients all over the United States. We have families in every state and U.S. territories as well. Our requirements are that you have to be either a U.S. citizen or here in the country legally so that you can be listed for transplant formally. But as long as they're 21 and under and follow those guidelines, we take any family that needs help and we're happy to help them. And there's no income guidelines. So if someone has a decent income, and oftentimes families with larger incomes are private insurance payers. And so their policies are a lot more expensive because it's a one-person policy as opposed to a team policy with a large business. We can help them. But our fundraising goals generally range from about $30,000 up to $100,000. There are a lot of factors that play into that: type of transplant, how old the child is, how far do they have to go to the transplant center. So there are a lot of variables that come into play. But the bottom line is we're here to help any patient that needs a life-saving transplant.
Wow. Yeah, that's I don't know, right? Like that's so heavy especially for parents like us who have younger children to think about. We're not in the situation, but how do you find that most when families do reach out, do they know about COTA? How?
That's a great question, Melissa. Usually in a hospital setting, a social worker is the person that introduces Coda to families. And what we've seen over the past several years is with the advent of a lot of online support groups, and Facebook is really leading the charge there. Many of our families hear about us not only from that social worker at the hospital, but then also they get that reinforced from one of the support groups. And I know Heather is going to be talking a little bit about that. That's one of the ways that she heard about us. And she now leads one of those support groups online and does a fantastic job, not only sharing with people that were transplanted in St. Louis where her son Blake was transplanted, but literally with families across the country that are part of that support group. So she's able to share the message of how we were able to help her family, and then they hear that at the hospital as well. And it's just a little bit more comfortable when you know someone that's gone through this and has been there and done that also is recommending our organization. But because we don't charge a fee for anything that we do, we really are a wonderful benefit. And a lot of times our families come to us and they've already started a GoFundMe account. GoFundMe can work if you need to raise $1,000 or a few $100s. But for transplant, most of our families, they need tens of thousands of dollars. And so GoFundMe is just not a very good option. So having Coda there is that backstop to make sure that that financial gap is not something that devastates a family is incredibly life-saving and emotionally very, very helpful for our parents as well.
Well, I like that you mentioned the emotional aspect, because COTA is more than just a place to raise money, right? You are there to support the families in many different ways.
We are, and just an example, my grandson was born 6 weeks early and spent the first 24 days of his life in NICU. And I think about what my son and daughter-in-law went through. Couldn't go to work. They were at the hospital every day, things thrown at them that emotionally they were just dealing with on their own. And to have someone come alongside you and say, not only are we going to be able to help you financially, but we'll put you in contact with support groups, much like what Heather leads, that will allow you to have an opportunity to talk to other families that have come through this and come through it very well, and take that burden off your shoulders. Because I think as a parent with a newborn, there's nothing worse than to find out that something's wrong with your child after 9 months of the excitement and anticipation, and then having that be the thing that kind of stops you cold. And so being able to help families and give them that resource to be able to plug into other groups, to take that financial burden off their shoulders, it really does help families tremendously. And transplant's just a big enough thing that no one's going to be able to get through that without some help.
How does COTA get the money? How do you raise these large funds for people?
Well, what we do is we train volunteers in our families' home communities to do fundraising events. And over the past 2 years of the pandemic, we had virtual tools that we were ready to go with earlier, but honestly, no one cared about those. They wanted to do the live events at their kids' school, at their local faith community, in their neighborhood. But since the pandemic, we've been able to put those tools to great use. And now that people are starting to feel more comfortable getting out, we're seeing that those virtual tools, along with the live events that we used to do regularly, are really a good combination. And working in tandem, we're able to raise a significant amount of money. But again, using those volunteers, those family and friends of our patient families in their local community, whether that local community is their hometown or an extended community across the country. We found a lot of our military families have been at multiple posts, and maybe grandma and grandpa live in one place and they live in another. We just are able to pull those social networks together to help our families raise money and again, take that burden off their shoulders.
So Rick, why should folks choose COTA for fundraising?
Well, I think as a fundraiser, one of the greatest things that I can say to any contributor is that 100% of what you give to help a COTA family actually stays to help them. We're funded in such a way that our staff salaries, our travel, all those costs to keep the lights on, that's funded in another way. Every dollar that comes in for our families, like you're going to hear from Heather, that actually stays to be used for that patient. And we guarantee that, and that's been our guarantee for the last 36 years. We want volunteers and supporters to know that they're actually helping some family individually, as opposed to a large bucket of money or putting a name on a building. It's actually going to help someone directly.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing thing to do for someone. I'm sure it really just puts a smile on your face when you can be a part of that and give something, especially to a child who has so much life ahead of them. I want to thank you so much for filling us in on this amazing resource that you're giving to people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you allowing us to have some time to talk about this. Last month was Donate Life Month across the country, but May is a good time to talk about it as well.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more in exactly 60 seconds from COTA.
Now that we've learned about the Children's Organ Transplant Association, we're going to hear firsthand how this organization changes lives. Joining us is Heather Bahr, here to tell us how her son, Blake, and his journey with COTA. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So yes, we want to hear the story. We know a little bit, but we really want to hear from you about how Blake got involved with COTA. You know, we don't have all the time in the world, but we definitely need to know how it began.
So our son, Blake, he's 7 years old and he is a kidney transplant recipient. He had his transplant at 14 months, and our journey with COTA started early on, when we were in the hospital, and we got introduced to the organization, and, they've just been incredible. They are a partner with us through his transplant experience. And, people just don't realize that there's so much, even though we have great insurance, there's so many expenses and so many things that, come along with the transplant. And they've been there with us every step of the way. They helped our friends and family when Blake was going through his transplant to raise funds, and they were a support to us and have just been wonderful.
Blake's story started in utero, right? You had some complications in your pregnancy, and then he had a really tough beginning of his life, it sounds like.
He did, yes. So he's kept us on our toes from the beginning. So my pregnancy, when we went in, my husband and I, to find out if we were having a boy or a girl, we found out also that we were having a son, and that he had one kidney, and that it was in his sleep. He had something called hydronephrosis. So basically there was fluid backing up, and causing his kidney to fail, essentially. And while I was pregnant, I wasn't creating enough amniotic fluid. So you need that, in order for the baby to develop. And so I was on hospital bed rest leading up to his pregnancy, or to the delivery rather. And at 36 weeks, we decided to go ahead and bring Blake out into the world, and the doctors needed to get a closer look at him. And, while I was pregnant, I was meeting with all different specialists, and transplant was brought up at that time, but it was kind of a worst case scenario. And unfortunately, once Blake was delivered, he went into kidney failure at just 2 days old and was taken by ambulance to our children's hospital to start dialysis and the road towards transplant.
So the hospital did they talk to you about COTA pretty early on? Or I know you said that was worst case, but how far or how soon did you become involved?
Yeah, no, at that point we hadn't talked to them. We spent 135 days that first year in the hospital. And I just remember, just feeling so alone and so overwhelmed, and kind of doing some research on my own and talking to the social worker and the financial coordinator, and COTA came up. And as I looked at their website with my husband, we were just like, wow, this sounds incredible. So I, made that initial contact, and actually Rick called me, and I remember that day so clear, being in my son's hospital room and talking to him on the phone, and just feeling like so comfortable, and just kind of a huge weight taken off my shoulders, that we weren't going to be alone anymore, and that there was going to be someone that could help not only our son and our family with the financial piece, but to also help family and friends who really, wanted to help Blake, but, they just didn't know how. And so they just, they came in after my initial conversation with Rick, and they met with family and friends and helped them with fundraising ideas, and got the word out in the community, and just really helped lift us up, and, gave us a lot of hope in a time that was very, very difficult. So
how unusual. You really don't expect, Rick, the president and CEO of an organization, to call you up specifically and want to know your story and make you feel comfortable with what's happening.
Yes, like I said, that time was just such a whirlwind, and we were living in the hospital with our, our only baby, and, to get that call and to just feel, a sense of relief talking to him was very special, and something I'll never forget. And, from now and fast forward, till like 7 years later, and they've just always been in our lives, and everyone we came in contact has been great. And we couldn't do this journey without them.
I mean, yeah, when you think about how terrifying it has to be to have a child that is having kidney failure when he's born, you're so worried about everything. And then thinking about this financial burden on your shoulders. And then for that to just be lifted has to just be something that's the biggest relief you've probably ever felt in your life.
Yes, because I made the decision to, leave a career that I loved, because I didn't need him in the hospital, and I had gone on early leave, and, was in the hospital myself when I was pregnant. And so we just had so much going on, from the financial piece, and, people just don't realize, even with great insurance, how much is not covered. And Coda, was able to help with those things as far as medications and, insurance premiums and, trips back and forth to the hospital. And it just took such a weight off of our shoulders and allowed us to focus on what was important, keeping our son alive and getting him through dialysis and getting our family on the other side and him ready for transplant.
So Heather, let's talk about the donor and how that person was found.
Yeah, so her name's Lori. She's an incredible woman, and our story. So when Blake was in the hospital, we wanted a way to communicate with family and friends. So we started a Facebook page called Brave Blake's Battle as a way to just put things out there and updates, because we weren't sleeping and we just wanted a central place for everyone to go. And once Blake was big enough for transplant, I had shared a picture of him holding a sign saying that he was ready and he reached the 25-pound weight requirement. And Lori saw my post and she sent me a message the next day, introducing herself and explaining a little bit about her. And just instantly we felt like so connected, and I just felt like I'd known her forever. And we messaged back and forth, and she said that she would want to be tested to see if she would be an option to be a donor for Blake. And from there, she started her testing, and she was tested for 6 months and ended up being an amazing match for him. And, it's pretty wild. She was actually a school nurse at the elementary school that I went to in a very small town. So we have that connection. And then we had all these mutual friends because she lived in the same town that I grew up in at the time. So it's just, I get goosebumps thinking about it now, just how, we were placed in each other's lives at the perfect time. And
so Heather, to be clear, this Lori reached out to you not knowing online, right? This is
not knowing. Yeah, she
crazy.
One night it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, and she was looking on her iPad and
Oh my
pictures. And the other connection with that is that her mom was a kidney transplant recipient, and she knew firsthand like what our family was going through, and to see a baby going through something that her mom went through as an adult, and she had her transplant for 17 years, and she unfortunately passed away. She needed a second transplant and was not able to do that in time. And so Lori always said she had the desire to be a donor, and we're just very, very blessed that she chose Blake in our family. So, yeah.
It was like, I guess you could call her like a guardian angel.
She is.
Really, truly, that's an amazing story. Really is.
Yeah, talk about that relationship now that you have with Lori, but also Blake. I'm sure they're really close now.
So cute together, and she moved a few hours away, but we always try to see each other several times a year, and FaceTime and send little video clips back and forth. And so she's still a nurse, and she's just an amazing woman. She's got the best family. She has 3 daughters, and her husband's great. And we've done big get-togethers and small one-on-one get-togethers, and she's a phenomenal woman. She always says that she wished she had another kidney so she could give it to another kid. So it's a great experience for her too, and she's remarkable. And yeah, her and Blake will always be close for sure.
We're years out now from Blake having his transplant. What is life like now? Does he still need meds? How does it work? Do you still need that funding help as time goes on?
Yes, absolutely. Blake is 6 years post-transplant. So him and Lori celebrated their kidney-versary, we call it. So in January. So, but people don't realize that kidneys typically only last 10 to 15 years. And, we're obviously praying that we're on the longer end of that, but that's where Coda, will come in hand for the rest of his life. And, Blake, in addition to kidney disease, also has a lot of other medical diagnosis, and to be able to use the funds that were raised by family and friends for his medication, because he's on a lot of different medications that he has to be on in life to keep his kidney from being rejected. And, he also does a lot of therapy. As he was on a feeding tube and he was lethargic. And so he's needed occupational therapy and physical therapy and all those things to help him get where he is today. And again, being able to have Coda and those resources available for him has been amazing and such a blessing to us. So
you talk about the resources that have been available to you with Coda. And Rick even mentioned that you're someone that has like an emotional support group for people.
Yeah, well, we've all kind of connected with each other through, Facebook has been a great resource, and I think maybe even 7 years ago, people weren't using it as they are today. Like when we posted about Blake needing a transplant, we didn't know someone would reach out to us, and now you do see people connecting in that way, and so just having a group of us that have been through this journey and that have a kiddo that has gone through transplant and all the ups and downs of the roller coaster. And, all of us have the same mindset though, that have worked with Coda, that, wow, what a blessing they are. And that they have really, made a huge impact in our lives and have been a partner now and will be as our kids grow up. So.
Yeah, but imagine, I would think that this community, your support, those around you, it's a lifelong bond, not just, with your son and Lori, but just those who reach out to you, like you make these connections because you have this in common. And I guess I'd want to ask, you talked a lot and you explained in regard to having why parents should use or reach out to Coda. But is there anything, like what would you really want to say to parents who are hesitant for whatever the reason or don't know?
I would just say that dialysis and transplant is the hardest thing you're ever going to go through, and you don't have to do it alone. My husband and I, even though we had each other and had each other to lean on, we felt very alone and very isolated. And so once we found Coda, then they also introduced us to other families that were in similar situations throughout the country. And just to know that you have someone that can help you, because family and friends are going to offer to help, but you don't know what to ask them for. And Coda kind of came in and worked with them so that we could focus on our son in the hospital. And that just alone helped us, because we knew they wanted to do stuff for us, but you can't ask for a meal when you're living in the hospital. It's just, you don't know what to ask for. And you want a way that everybody can feel involved and that the community can know, what you're going through if they do want to help support. And they just put all the pieces of that puzzle together for families like ours.
Thank you, Heather, so much for filling us in on your family story, on Blake's story. I'm sure it's hard to talk about sometimes because it's a big deal. It's really emotional. So I appreciate you coming on the show and really telling us about everything.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
If you have an idea for a parenting show topic or guest, talk to us on Twitter and Facebook at #CTN Ann Arbor.
And for more on our programming and services, visit a2gov.org/CTN and visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to watch a full lineup. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for joining us on this adventure in parenthood.